Hi, and welcome to another of the DTA screencasts. In this session, we're looking at revision, and we'll just look at a couple of the different things that I reckon you should focus on, first of all, and then we're going to move into Highland Games and Festival Games in public schools. It should take no more than 10 minutes to cover both of those sections. So the idea is not to go over absolutely everything again. And that might work for some of you, and that's absolutely fine. But what I want you to do this time when you do your revision is identify the key sections and then see what you actually know already. After that, check that, measure it against a question. From there, you can easily work back over what you got wrong and what you got right, and then fill in the gaps. Instead of just literally going over everything and everything again, find the different sections that you're not quite confident on, and then work through those particularly. But once you've done that, you've worked out the bits you've done wrong, you think, oh yeah, I know those, you've got to measure them again. So that could be in the form of a question, flip cards, whatever suits you. So I'm not telling you how to revise, because what suits you will be best. But all I'm saying is that you've got to measure what you're actually doing. Or else, how are you actually going to know before you walk into the exam? And the idea is not to have any surprises when you walk into the exam. Alright, so we're going to go through public schools. The main part in the specification states you've got to know the main features of public schools and also the development of sports. So that's what we're going to look at. So there should be a couple of things here that should refresh your memory. These are the main features of public schools. So you had to have money, and there were also academic staff that eventually started to assist the games. They could employ pro coaches because they had the cash, plenty of free time space, and there was also the house system. So those are the main features. So how we remember that, and I'm sure you've seen this before, is pastime. So whenever you're thinking of public schools, that's all you need to be able to remember, is pastime. So it was the pro coaches that encouraged the development of the technique and the skill of the students. There was the house system, the inter-house system, and also then you had house versus house, and then eventually school versus school. You had the academic staff. Initially didn't really want anything to do with it, but after some reforms, the academic staff started to encourage. Also, very important point, sixth formers. So the sixth form students started to encourage the lower forms to take part in physical activity. They had plenty of space and they had plenty of time because they were boarding in the evenings, late afternoons. They had time to carry out physical activity, therefore became a lot better. You needed money to go to these schools, and the E for pastime is Eton, which is just an example, but I'm sure you can think of others. So you could put these into categories of opportunity, provision and esteem, but that's more to do with a link to the previous subject. So the second part of public schools that you would need to address is how on earth did the entire, most of the world end up playing the sports that we did when we were in public schools. So how did it get to Australia? How did it get to America, South Africa, West Indies, and so on? And it was through this. The other thing that you need to remember, Top Vic. Public schools spread the ethos and the rules of the game through that. So what is Top Vic? Hopefully you remember this. Teachers, officers, parents, vicars, industrialists, colonies or community. So let's have a look at one of these. So in your community, let's say you were lucky enough to go to a public school. Then when you returned back to your community, you would take these rules and regulations with you, and therefore it would develop within your community. Pretty simple. So the other things that developed was the technical aspect of the game. So if you imagine this was your Ashbourne mob football and compare that to this one here, there are slight differences. So the changes that took place were, let's move this on, there we go. So there were the rules. So there was an introduction of rules first and foremost, and that was so that they could play inter-house matches. You had sort of set up goals instead of just banging it against the wall, uniforms, lines. Other ones were development of leagues, and a really important one was there, the setup of the national governing bodies. So quite a significant influence on how our sport is today. Alright, moving very quickly on to the traditional games. Here, if you had a look at this, if you want to pause this and have a look, could you identify the characteristics of that picture there, most of you would know that that's Lewis fireworks. Okay, so the characteristics for most of the festival games are these ones here: local, traditional, social, annual, tourism, rowdy, relatively isolated, and ritually based for some. So what you would need to be able to do is actually explain, if that was the key word in the question, is explain how each one of those impact on the festival. So if we look at just the one there, the local, so because it's local, that encourages the camaraderie, the sense of community, and therefore it would obviously encourage people to want to do the annual game again. So if you went down that entire list, what you would need to be able to do, if the keyword, as said before, was explained, is go through each one and say how it would impact on the festival. So let's have a look at some other questions here. So you've got identify characteristics. So that's relatively straightforward. That's just stating what each one of those is. Explain the reasons for the survival of festival games, and we just did that regarding local. And you could easily work through each one of those. And then the last one, explain the reasons for some games not surviving. So for this, here's the answer. So it's the industrialization of the country. So it was a transfer from rural to urban life. So therefore there wasn't the area to be actually playing. It was industrial, dirty, not a lot of space, not a lot of time because people working in the factories. First World War wiped out a generation of men and a lot of women as well. So therefore there wasn't the palette. People weren't really into celebration and festival at that time. In the Second World War, this brought a new modern age, as well as obviously changing the focus away from festival games. So this one brought new technology, new ways of living, and not this outdoor relaxed approach with these festival games at the heart of it. People's communities and lives changed significantly after the Second World War. Now, some of the festivals had issues in relation to hooligans, so that was one of the reasons that they had to stop. And do you recognise that guy there? He's quite famous now. So there was also the danger to participants. There was this quite aggressive and physical approach to a lot of the activities. And this one here is shin kicking, that still goes on today. And because of this dangerous and rowdy approach, there was also the Reformation. In other words, the church's influence on how society was going to be. And basically they turned around and said that they felt that these games were unholy. There was too much drinking, promiscuity, and therefore they kind of put a stop to it. They said, we don't want these, we want a more Christian-based type game. Alright, so that's those two sections in a nutshell. Hopefully that will give you the basic ideas that you need to take into the exam, and then obviously you're adding those finer details where needed. Alright, thanks very much for your time. I'll speak to you soon.